during last class, I made the comment that render engine does not have different materials. While we can, for example, pick a wood, steel, or plastic fabric material, essentially they are all the same. The only true difference we have is, for example, a 2D and a 3D material. But with all the 2D materials, for example, we used to make something look like wood or fabric, plastic, leather, steel, we all use the same building blocks. So we use something for the texture, which will give the diffuse color its unique look. So with the texture, we describe if actually the person sees wood veneer or fabric. And then we have glossy that basically defines how smooth a surface is. And then we have the bump mapping for the three-dimensional structure. So everything I showed you for how to create the texture for the diffuse and then the glossy and the bump mapping for the wood applies exactly in the same manner to, for example, our fabric material. So currently the fabric material doesn't look too bad. No, we can see the structure more or less, but it's not really very finished because it's still actually simply flat. And there's also no reflectivity on it, so it's very, very dull. So I mentioned before, to see a reflection or a bump mapping when we create it, best is to have a big light, which we can use, so that actually the light can cast actually the highlights or the shadows. So I created here a light. Let me adjust the strength correctly. Okay, so this is good. Perfect. Okay. So let's select the fabric, and I will add now the mixing shader, and then I will add, for example, the glossy. I will put this one in, and also here I will use for the moment the Fresnel. And now if we rotate around, you can see there is a certain level of reflectivity on it, but the reflectivity is very distracting. First, if we set this to this, then truly this is just a print, and this is kind of like some sort of polyester foil material we're sitting on. So because the surface has a structure, we can't really make this reflection very strong. Very sharp. So we have to blur it. So here we can actually really work with a bigger value. Okay, good. Maybe the reflection is also a little bit too strong. So I am going to introduce you to what's called the math node. So Shift A, then we go to converter and math. So here we have input A and input 2, and then we can do very basic mathematical equations. So for example, if I plug this one in between, you see actually that the reflection got a lot stronger. If I put this one to there or there, okay, because 0.5 value is added to this value. So if we set this one to 0.9, now we see it's getting stronger. Not as much. Okay. So if we, for example, say, hey, multiply, actually you see it gets a lot weaker. And essentially what we did was, whatever this value information is, this node produces, we multiply by 0.5, which means we halve it. So we divide it basically by 2, multiply by 1, and you see it's basically exactly the same. So this is one of the nice parts about the node system here in Blender. With cycles, we can create relationships, how something should work, and then if we still want to tone something down or increase it, we can in between, where possible, plug in simply a math node. And for example here, I just want to have 1/3 of that reflectivity working. So this is, for example, 0 and 0.3. You see there is a tiny tick of shininess to it, and that's kind of like what I want. That shouldn't look like plastic. Okay, perfect. However, what's missing, if this really should be a nice woven coarse material, we need to have the bump mapping for it as well. Okay, so most of the building blocks we have already, so let's move all this over. There is actually my my image node. Perfect. And what we can do now is the following. There's a good way and a bad way. I show you for the moment first this way, and then later I will show you a second way. So currently you can see the diffuse color or the texture is nice and colored, but that's not really what I want. If you remember from the wood bump mapping, for glossy or something, we always need black and white information for the bump mapping. And currently this image has color. That's not what I want. I want to decolorize it. And to do this, we can go Shift A, converter, and then say RGB, so red, green, blue, to black and white. Then we plug it in. And now you see this is actually a black and white, so grayscale image or texture. Now this is what we can better actually use for the bump mapping. Also there, for example, if we want to work with the colors a little bit more, so for example certain parts stand out more, we can use here the color ramp. So you know it's a coarser look. Okay. So all those I put together there, and then this I move a little bit to there, so you better see the individual building blocks. So this is how I process the same texture for the fabric. And now we have to plug in our bump map. Okay, so this goes to there. Let's take a look at this. Plug this one in. And this is for example right now the pure bump mapping, so way too strong. 0.2, 0.5. Yeah, there you start seeing something. Again, you see here if I take this off, just diffuse, and the structure is the bump mapping effect. And now you can see that with the bump mapping it starts to look a little bit richer. Can we play with this a little bit? No, it doesn't really do much. Okay, so for example, for the moment I take this off, so you can see the glossy reflection better, because I will add this one to there. So there you can see now the same effect. Okay, so we set 0.2 or 0.3 to be nice and blurry, and you see then it gets a lot softer. And let's put this back in. Perfect. Okay, so maybe let's do a basic comparison. Just plain diffuse and the diffuse with a little bit of shininess on top. So now I can adjust the math node so I get a little bit more of sheen on my object. Maybe I want to turn off this one so it's a little bit easier to see. Now and there you can see the bump mapping actually even better, and this looks pretty flat And now there, this has a good feel to it. And maybe without, and with perfectly reflective, and just the diffuse. Okay, so this is, for example, a basic way how then we can take a fabric material and then we can add a little bit of shininess on top, because every material to a certain degree has a little bit of reflectivity. Specifically when we work with polyester or something, and when we work with leather, then anyway it will be reflective or somewhat glossy. So we have to add that a little bit to it. Just as a note, for example, when you have very fluffy fabric materials, let's say like felt, you have a lot of fibers coming up at the ends, which would be illuminated around there because of the light. Then there's another way how we could even enhance this, but that's a little bit more advanced. We will reserve that for later. For the moment, let's keep this structure as our basic starting point. And there you see again, we decide our UV coordinate system. Then we decide with the mapping the size of our texture. For example, 2 or 10 or 8. You can see everything updates, texture and the bump mapping and the glossy, everything. Then this mapping we feed into the material, and then from the material we generate all the information needed for the bump mapping, which we then feed into the diffuse and glossy and mix those together. So you see pretty much the same steps, for example, with the wood material. There's only one small thing left I would like to adjust to my material, and that is how the glossy material is being stretched over my surface. So you see currently that if, for example, I disconnect the bump mapping, the whole area is glossy. But if this is really a three-dimensional structure, then most of the reflection would happen only on top of the mountains, not in the deeper valleys. So how do I do that? And again, in computer graphics, we have to take shortcuts, try to create the illusion. So we have, for example, here the roughness slider. And the roughness slider basically defines where is something smooth and where is something rough. So what we could do is, instead of using, again, 0 to 1, we use a grayscale image. So we plug this one in. You see our reflection looks different. And when we zoom in more, you start seeing that there are actually certain areas which are nice and clear and others that look black. Black more because the reflection there, the roughness is very high. So when I take a look at this material output, you can see black in our case here means a roughness of 0, and then white means a higher roughness. So probably something like this or so. So you see different roughness values. So, and because we can now plug in a texture, there we can see the different results. Okay, and if we mix this, for example, with our diffuse shader and take a look at it, there you can see, like a little bit of dots here and there. So it's not so uniform, but it has a little bit more of play to it. There. And then also let's plug in back the bump mapping. This is actually going to be interesting to see. So no bump mapping, and with the bump mapping. And there you see that, again, because everything is driven from the same texture, all these elements nicely line up. And specifically here you can see there are small shadows. So that works actually pretty good. Now the question is, do we really want to use exactly the same gradient that we use actually for the bump mapping, also to adjust the roughness? So let's see what happens if maybe we drag this one out, make a copy, and then here we drag this one in. So we bring this one to there and this one to there. It's that result. If we bring this one over to there. Okay, see, you can adjust those a little bit. What happens if, for example, the white we make more black? Or for example, the black more white. So everything is very, very diffuse gloss, so very rough. So the black here in this case defines the roughness, and then the white defines how clear something is. So you see, everything is more clear. So everything is black, 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 nice and glossy. If everything would be white, white, then roughness is high. Okay, so now it's up to you to decide how you want to play with this. Maybe we can try to get this really nice and tiny in contrast to the bump mapping, or maybe we make this a little bit bigger. And the main idea there is that maybe the reflection is not only on a sharp line, but for example a little bit occupying a more area of these wood parts. Because everything that's black right now there, for example, wouldn't get any reflection. So it's a question of the transition from white to black. But this is only kind of like a minor detail. So let's put this one back. And the bump mapping is in. Maybe increase this one, 0.5. Yeah, now we can see this a little bit better. Good. Okay, let's keep this for the moment this way. Again, this is just only a basic approach to how to create those materials, and then with the semester we will start refining them step by step.